Well, hey guys, listen, one thing I know is that all work and no play makes for a not very fun gardener to spend time with. So Stuart and I have been shooting all morning. I've actually been doing a lot of work, a lot of clipping and things. And when Hubs came out and said that it was time to take a break and maybe since it was the weekend, have a mimosa, we enthusiastically agreed and decided that it might be kind of fun for you guys to join us, mimosas in hand, as we tour the garden and we look at the roses, because the roses is a very short season in Oklahoma. I don't know about where you live, but here with our high wind, with our high heat, they just don't last very long. So while they look nice, I thought we would take a little stroll and I would share a little bit about my philosophy of growing roses historically and now in the present, how I feel about them. So as we go by the garden bench area, you guys have seen this 1,000 times before. It's largely surrounded by hydrangeas. And the reason I love hydrangeas is because they quickly fill the void that is created when the roses are out of bloom, and they last a little bit longer. So when it gets to be hydrangea season, we can revisit this area. But as we come along here, and you can see all of the huge buds on the oak leaf hydrangeas, and this on this all that glitters viburnum, but I'll talk about that later. We're going to pass this beautiful white deutzia that is just about past its prime before we even get to a rose. And let me share with you guys that when I started this garden, I would say in the first 5 to 10 years, maybe 15 years, I had lots of roses. And I loved them, and they were beautiful, and they were romantic, and they were fragrant. My favorite varieties are David Austin roses, but they were also a whole lot of work, and they just didn't look good for very long. So in terms of the investment of my time, energy, and the care and maintenance, I decided to kind of reduce my rose footprint, make it much smaller, much more easy to maintain, but I want to show you what remains because these are some of my very favorite ones. So if you look over here, I've got a gorgeous rubies and gold Weigela, which by the way is a great substitute if you need a rose substitute because your roses have expired because of rose rosette, or if you're like me, you don't want to grow a lot of roses anymore because they're so high maintenance, then you might want to consider some of the beautiful Weigelas. But behind it, and it's a bit windblown, you guys, and this makes me so sad because just day before yesterday, it was glorious, is the fragrant Gertrude Jekyll that is named after the very famous gardener Gertrude Jekyll. It is so fragrant, it's so beautiful. I need to cut some of those that are still fresh and bring them inside. It suffers a little bit from black spot. It's not a real large vigorous rose in this space because it's getting a little too shady, but nevertheless I love it, and I love the fact that it's not too vigorous. Especially I love the scent. So it's one that has great sentimental value to me, and I really like it. A lot of you guys ask about growing roses in the shade and which ones work in the shade. Roses don't want to grow in the shade. They really want a minimum, if not more, of 6 hours of sun a day. They also want a lot better air circulation than I have here in this area, which is very heavily planted and congested. That will help avoid things like black spot and any other fungal diseases they might be prone to. But if you have a shady area that gets maybe adequate sun, consider growing a white one, because the ones that are white or labeled Alba tend to be a little bit more shade tolerant. You might even inquire when you're ordering them. Most of the time I buy roses online. Again, check with David Austin and see if something like Fair Bianca or one of the other white roses might work for you. But again, roses in general really want good strong light, and actually they really don't like a lot of wind like we have here in Oklahoma. One of the reasons that I am reducing my rose footprint. So if we go further into the garden, this area has been transformed, I don't know how many different times, mostly because of weather events. There used to be, and some of you may recall, that in this area right here in the corner, there was a really large blue Atlas cedar, and it succumbed to I'm not sure what, but I am going to blame it on the power pole that's behind it, because this area got so much work when we had a power outage because of one of the ice storms, and I think they probably did some damage to it as they were working on the power pole. But in front of it, and so beautiful right now, is a sweet little pink noisette rose. This too has real sentimental value to me. It was a gift from the garden editor, Gene, at Southern Living years ago. It was after one of our shoots. He had it sent to me. The bees love it. It's more delicate. You can see it's in full sun. It's a very pale pink, which still looks beautiful with the deeper pinks of the Gertrude Jekyll and the Wigelia. And I just really love the way it looks. It's sweet. I've got it kind of growing on a tutor here. That comes from Gardener's Supply. So once it's finished, I will give it a good prune after bloom. It's got a subtle fragrance, not nearly as intense as some of the David Austin roses. Nevertheless, I really love it. If you come over a little bit further, as we start going into the potager, I've been showing, though right now it's definitely about finished, this beautiful climbing old blush rose that grows on this short fence that looks back into the potager. And forgive me, we've still got all of our camera equipment and everything set up. This is truly a behind the scenes kind of little tour for you. But I love it because it's bi-dimensional. The color of it is really interesting. It starts out kind of a dark pink and then it turns paler as the blooms age. I used to have it growing on a trellis on the roof of my husband's office studio in the back. But again, because it was so high maintenance and probably not very safe, as I got older, I didn't want to climb on the roof anymore to attach it. But at one time, it probably covered half of the roof of that. At one time also, here's an historical little tidbit, I used to have cable line when the phone line had to be attached from this outbuilding to the power pole. And for a while, because it was safe to do so, I also had some of the vines that literally climbed across the garden. And it was really beautiful, and it created a pale pink rosy bower. Again, that's not practical anymore, probably not even safe, so I just whacked it back. It is a great performer. It periodically shows a little bit of a sign of rose rosette, but I've been able over the past 4 years to kind of cut that away, and it still is beautiful every spring. It's got a subtle fragrance. It's a very aggressive rambler. Once it gets finished completely, I will cut it back very, very hard. And that will help me get more air circulation back in here, and it will also tidy it up. So it's beautiful while it's here, but it's also very cathartic to cut it back when it gets a little bit too big. As we go into the potager, again, I used to have all sorts of roses back in here. I had Bonica, I had some Fair Bianca, I had a gorgeous heritage rose over here. Slowly but surely, not because of their decline, but because of the environmental changes. Things either got too shady, too windy, or I just decided that they weren't performing enough throughout the gardening year that I decided to do away with them. And I think sometimes when we talk about the definition of garden bravery, sometimes I think it is sacrificing something you love or moving something you love for the betterment of the look of the garden year round. Increasingly as I garden, I care more about what it looks like year round and good garden structure, because we like to enjoy the garden throughout the 12 months as much as we can, not just during a very short period of time when things look their best. This way, it looks their best for a longer period of time. So if we go back into the potager, I said in an earlier video I did on the allium border that I used to have 3. They were growing on trellises, gorgeous pale pink New Dawn roses that covered the expanse of this. They were beautiful. They were labor intensive like nothing else. I had to torture them to grow in place. They were very thorny. They got black spot. And they just didn't last very long. And I want things that are more enduring. So ultimately, I took them out. I replaced them with some things that look a little bit better, a little bit more structural. You can see the vestiges, though. Sometimes I like to leave little hints of garden history. Apparently, the New Dawns grew on rootstock, and I've got a little bit of the rootstock. It came back from the base that's growing here. You can see it's got some black spot, and I will cut it all the way to the ground a little bit later. I just wanted to leave it there as a hint and a reminder, and because for a certain period of time it was the exact same shade as some poppies that were growing nearby. Now, right now, this is a work in progress. This is one that I am really trying to pamper, give it lots of TLC, and cultivate. It's just now coming into bloom. This is a gorgeous constant spry. It was named after the fabulous floral designer Constance Spry. It's a gorgeous pale pink. It's got huge kind of rosette blooms. It looks like an old-fashioned rose. It doesn't have a lot of scent, but I love the way its canes arch. It's resistant to black spot. I did a lot of cleanup and tending on it. Actually, I think, Stuart, didn't we do a video on that? And I'll show that a little bit later of how I tried to practice good rose hygiene early in the season, but it's beautiful right now. It's cascading, and I like the way it has a very bowery effect. So it kind of undulates here and there. It goes over the fence and it kind of fills this corner. And I really like the way it looks. And this is probably a rose that I'm going to keep for the long haul and just train it in different ways. I used to have more roses that grew in this bed, but again, because they kind of looked unsightly and required a lot of work, and also a lot of spraying to control black spot, to control powdery mildew. Their roses are just high maintenance, and I've said it once, I've said it a million times. I do my own gardening work around here, and I just got tired of taking care of them for the minimum return on my investment of time. But there are certain roses I just absolutely have to have. And one of them, you guys, is Graham Thomas. Now, I've had this in another area before. It probably didn't get, and right now it's starting to get a little bit too shaded out. And this is one of those things, it's just a gorgeous rose. It's got a fabulous fragrance. I love the way it looks with purple. But really, what do I grow this for? I grow this more for utilitarian purposes. It's too shady back here. It gets some black spot, but I grow it simply to clip. So as soon as the buds get large enough, I clip them and I bring them inside. It's more of a functional plant for me than a landscape rose anymore, because again, it's getting a little bit too shady. Ultimately, I'll probably have to move it. You know, gardens are just such dynamic, ever-changing things. So there is just a little rose tour of my garden. I don't have a lot of them anymore. The ones that I have, though, are here for prized sentimental reasons. Stuart, you might finish off with a look at the remains of the climbing old blush as it looks back into the backyard. And I think it looks so pretty against the boxwood hedge. So, go smell some roses, you guys. If you can, have a mimosa. And thanks for taking this little rose tour with me.